healthcare and perfect. There's the recording. So just to reiterate, we're going to be going over resumes and cover letters. And this is a really fun session where we're going to go over a lot of different details about what you should include in a resume and cover letter. When would you actually use a resume and cover letter? Because I know also a lot of you are considering maybe continuing education. So maybe like medical school or going for further graduate studies. So knowing kind of the differences of what you should include on your resume will be really helpful. I will have the chat open. So if any questions do come up during the session, feel free to pop them in the chat. But if not, we will have time at the end as well to go over any questions. So we'll just jump right in. So these are the learning outcomes. So really what we're going to be going over is kind of understanding the overall role of a resume and cover letter. We'll then go over format and how to organize a resume effectively. We're also going to talk about ways you can update your resume, some current trends, because a lot of students actually don't know what most organizations do with your resume. And I know a lot of times, and I have done this too, where I've applied to a role and then I never hear from the employer. So I feel like I've been ghosted. So talking about maybe why that happens and how you can then, get ahead of the system so you're not going to be ghosted and instead can get those interviews and opportunities that you really want. And then end with the cover letter format. So before you start thinking about what to include on your resume, start writing it because it can be a really tedious task. We really want you to think about these points to ask yourself. So first is what specific skills and I'm trying to highlight. So something to keep in mind, if you're applying to a job or an internship, a resume is used to demonstrate that you're a qualified candidate for the role. A lot of times these are going to be the different skills and experiences that you've had throughout your time as a student and prior or in different roles or in volunteer spaces. So you really want to think about what skills am I trying to highlight if I'm trying to pursue maybe a role in healthcare or a role in medicine. The next question is, how can I highlight the qualities required for the job on my resume? So I kind of touch base on this too, but a lot of times for different jobs, they're going to have a job description in which you're going to be told, we're looking for someone that works on a team, that has great communication skills, that is detail oriented, that can work on multiple projects at a time. And you really kind of want to think about, where have I also held those experiences that demonstrate all those different qualifications? So that's another point. The next is, how can I explain my experience in the most concise way possible? So resumes for medical school and graduate school can be a little bit different because those are called a CV, and that can include research experience, teaching, and other roles that can let you go past this standard one-page resume. But normally, all resumes should be one page. So the real estate on your resume is really limited. So you really want to talk about your experiences in a really concise way so that everything can be fit on a page. Then lastly, how can you illustrate your personal brand? So a resume is not only telling the story of your experiences and showing that you're a qualified candidate, you're giving whoever's reviewing your resume a taste of who you are and your personality, especially when it comes to things such as being a team player. Does your resume demonstrate that you've worked with others, for example, or does it show that you take initiative by taking on projects or being, maybe on the e-board of a student org? So that's really different ways that you can also illustrate your personal brand on a resume when going for different roles or applying to schools. So these are just the points to think about for your resume specifically. So now we're going to talk about the actual resume sections. And resumes will kind of change depending on who you talk to. And right now as a student, these are really the elements you should be including. So it's your contact information. So think, the name that you go by. You could also put any preferred names, your current location. Some students add their whole address. I would recommend not doing your address and instead just doing your city and state. And then also any contact information. So phone number that you can be contacted by and email. One thing to keep in mind about email is, I know I used to have some really fun nickname emails that had nothing to do with my name. It really helps when going for jobs or for grad school or anything else to put a professional email that just like your name, keep it simple. Like I have a friend that her email is, I think, Beta Butter Jelly. And it's not, don't do it for the job, do it for your friends, but just keep that in mind. So contact information should be just your name, maybe your school email. And then some students also include their LinkedIn URL. Then is the education section. So as of right now, all of you are students right now. So your education section should be first on the resume. And you can highlight your major if you have a minor. Definitely, if you're thinking about grad school, you are going to want to put that GPA there because that GPA does help a lot with the application criteria of schools looking at you as like a holistic candidate. So you want to put the GPA there. And then some students also put any relevant coursework. So if your major is directly tied to the field you want to go into, it might help to also include some of those classes that you've taken. Then the next section can be work experience. And then depending on the experience you have, you can call it different titles. You can call it just internship experience, work experience, volunteer experience, but the word experience should be included in that section like title. And I'll talk about application tracking systems later, but the word experience gets picked up by systems that scan your resume. So that's why we recommend having experience in the title. And that's where you can include any of your relevant work experiences that are tied to the field you want to go into. Then the other three sections kind of vary. Skills is definitely necessary, and we'll talk a lot about skills because it's really important in your resume, so I'll go back to that later. But project experience and activities really vary student by student. So let's say you're involved in many different executive boards and student orgs, you might have an activities or leadership section in which you can highlight all those achievements. And then project experience could also be another section to consider. Think about projects maybe you did in class that were long term, not just, a week that you're working on it, but the entire semester, or maybe through an internship, you worked on a project separate from your internship. Those are places you can kind of highlight those project experiences. And we also wanted to include even more sections because really for resumes, it's tailored to the role that you're going for or the opportunity you're interested in. So the sections also vary. So really with a lot of these sections, these could really be used if you're pursuing medical school or even further graduate school. So the first one on the left is an objective. We write this as optional. It's kind of like a mini cover letter. It's pretty much a summary of who you are, what you've done, and what you're hoping to gain. They're less popular now, but some students prefer to have it on their resume, so we just put it there as an option. But you'll see on most resume templates, the objective typically is not there. And your real estate on your resume is limited, so let's keep the objective out of it if need be. Then volunteer work. So a lot of times as students, you do a lot of amazing volunteer work. So that could really be a section to highlight, and you're going to have tangible experiences to talk about. Then sometimes you have a personal website or a blog or a portfolio that highlights the work that you've done. So that could be something to include in the contact information section of your resume. Certification. So a lot of times you are getting certified in something or you got a license, part of your role, you can include those certifications. And lastly, awards or scholarships, especially for grad school or medical school. It does help to see if you are given any scholarships, awards, or grants to help with your studies because it's a great way to show that you're like an all-star student. So really something to keep in mind. These are different things you can add to your resume. So before we jump to the actual content and what everything looks like, we also want to highlight what a resume should not be. So first and foremost, a resume should not be a running job history. And I see this a lot with students, and it's normal because really, I was never taught how to write a resume until I got to college. And then I was like, oh, it's not a running job history. So don't feel like in a resume, you have to include every single position you ever held. A resume should only be the most relevant experiences to the role or opportunity that you're going for. But if you want to include everything that you've ever done, that's where a LinkedIn profile is really great because the real estate is unlimited. You can add as many opportunities as you'd like. So something to keep in mind is maybe you've had a lot of different jobs that you've held. Maybe put them on LinkedIn and instead only keep the most relevant jobs and experiences on your resume. And your resume can change over time. So don't feel like your resume is one and done. It's going to change throughout your life so long as you update it. Then the next thing is a general list of all your responsibilities. So a lot of times, if you've held similar roles, you'll see that every single bullet point in your resume matches all the same, and you write everything you've ever done. But because the space on the resume is limited, you might consider only writing the responsibilities that are really detailed and specific to that role. So what I mean by that is if you've held maybe a front desk phone operator role before, and in both roles you answered emails and responded to phone calls, maybe only write it on one of the roles, and then on the other role talk about the other responsibilities that you were responsible for to kind of show the different diversification of your experiences. Then a one-size-fits-all document. So this is an interesting one, and it is a little bit different for graduate school and medical school, because typically with resumes, you're going to tailor it to every job or internship you apply for. You want it to really be specific to that role so that when somebody is looking at your resume or it's going through the resume tracking system, it shows that you are exactly aligned to the role itself based on how you've written your experiences. The one-size-fits-all document, though, is something you would use when you're applying to school because it is kind of tied to the program you want to go into, and it's not tied to an actual role. So just something to keep in mind that your resume shouldn't be the same for every job you go for, but if you're thinking about graduate school, it will most likely be a little bit more of a general resume that's outlining the field that you're interested in those experiences. Then vague and inconsistent, this is more things about formatting should be matching, fonts should be the same, keeping things really consistent that way makes it really easy for people to read. Same with disorganized, we talked about headings of different sections, so you have your education section, your skills section. Keep those headings in your resume because it does really help with the flow and reading of your resume. And lastly, grammatical mistakes. I cannot stress this enough. As much as you can, you got to triple check your resumes and anything you send to employers because it could be one small thing where if you're talking about being detail oriented and then you misspell something, it kind of contradicts one another. So as much as you can, really triple check your resumes and your different materials for anything. The same goes for school, like when you're turning an essay, proofread, 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 proofread. So now with some of those resume sections, I mentioned we're really going to go into detail about skills, but it's because the skills section really is important now because in a lot of roles, you can talk about your experiences and those action bullet points with the work experiences, but knowing that you have some hard skills and soft skills are really going to help you on your resume. So there's different types of skills. Hard skills are things like those technical skills that are kind of tangible. So think software, language, computer applications. Soft skills are a little bit different. They're non-technical skills, but they're kind of like people skills or those interpersonal skills that you're going to use in the day-to-day part of your job. So common, soft skills are things like communication, flexibility, and leadership. So we really want students to think about both because there are ways to demonstrate both on your resume. So this is kind of a slide from The Balance, which is an amazing career website, which kind of shows the differences between hard and soft skills. So normally on a skills section, you will see the hard skills kind of listed. Maybe I have, experience with Photoshop, or I have Excel, or I have, for like lab work, people talk about any type of research there, or a skill or like a software used for research. That can be listed as those hard skills. Soft skills will be more ingrained through your entire resume when you're talking about your experiences. So for example, if you led a student org, you would talk about led a student org of 60 students on this topic. That's a way to show a soft skill of leadership. Or teamwork is if you were in a work experience where you worked with others, you would talk about that experience and what the outcome was. So here's some skills section samples. So we wanted to include this because for every student, your skill section will be different. You're not supposed to have the same skill section as, the person next to you or your friend, because you each bring different unique skills and experiences to the table. So we just kind of want to highlight what you can consider putting in your skills section. So we have, software skills, computer skills, social media, advertising, languages, legal instruments. These are skills that, depending on what you're going to go into, are really going to help you a long way. So just something to think about. And for some reason, I cannot open the chat for this next activity. So I'm actually going to stop share in the meantime. But with all our presentations, especially in this virtual space, it can kind of be hard for me to talk the whole time, but we want to also hear from all of you. So in the chat, if you can you type out some of the skills that you think might be helpful in the life sciences or healthcare field? So what we can do, we'll say them out loud. So for those that are watching the recording, we'll be able to collect them. But now you kind of have like a skill toolbox of sorts you can go back to, kind of look back to think about, oh, I actually have that skill too. Maybe I should put it on my resume. So I'm putting it down so you all can write in the chat. So what are some skills that you think you can include on a resume? So we have lab experience, data analysis, communication, proper filing, paperwork, organization. Yes, 100%. I would also say too, if any of the roles you're considering are like client focused, or there's going to be maybe a patient of some type, having any type of like empathy skills or any skills that show that you know how to work with others and are mindful of people's feelings. Bedside manners is great. Also, confidentiality is huge. So if you've ever held a role that you had to deal with, confidential information, or you had paperwork that you had to keep confidential, talk about that, because that's really going to help you. And then in the chat, I'm also adding this link. That is not the link. I will add it after the session, but it's from a website called The Balance Career. And they actually have created this amazing list of all these different skills for healthcare by different roles. So if you want to be, a pharmacy technician, or you want to be a nurse, you can kind of look at each role, and it talks about the preferred skills needed for each role. So that's from The Balance Careers. It's amazing. And through any type of resume and cover letter activity, Google's your friend. So there's a lot of amazing resources out there for careers. So when in doubt, reach out to a career advisor at your school, but also look on the internet as well. So let me go back to sharing my screen. And thank you all for participating. I know sometimes it's easy on Zoom to just listen and take it all in, but hopefully it's a nice break from all the talking, even though I talk the entire time, but we'll go on. So now we're going to talk about those accomplishment bullet points. So with most resumes, when you're talking about your work experience, volunteer experience, projects, you're not just writing where you worked and what your title was. You're including information about how long you worked there for, as well as the actual location. So were you in Los Angeles? Were you in another part of California? Were you abroad? You're going to want to include that information. But then the most important part is really these accomplishment bullet points, because a lot of times if you were just an intern at an organization, an intern can be anything. So you really want to talk about what you did as an intern in that role. And that's what's really going to help you either get that job or internship, or demonstrate that you're a qualified candidate. So you do that through accomplishment bullet points. So it's writing a sentence in not a traditional sentence way. You don't start with the subject, you actually start with an action verb. So for example, let's say I was like a communications intern and I handled social media. So I would say something about manage Facebook and Instagram posts for a medical software company. You start with manage. You're not saying I did this. It just starts with the action verb. And then if you're currently in the role, you would say it in present tense. If it was a past role, you would write it in past tense. So if you're currently doing something right now on your resume, you're submitting to someone, you would write it in present tense. But if it's a past tense role, or it's something you did in the past, use a past tense. So manage versus managed. Then throughout the resume and through the accomplishment bullet points, you want to show some type of numerical measure. This can be, maybe you managed a budget. So there's like the dollar sign there that you dealt with like finances before. The number is for numerical. So a lot of students will do this if they were in an organization where they led it, talk about how many students you led, or if you were interning somewhere and you were managing, reaching out to clients every day. You would talk about how many clients you reached out to every day. And then percentages could be the same thing. Depending on whatever that measure was, you can talk about that percentage. So a lot of times, like I talked about the communication intern, if I was managing social media posts and I grew followers by 10%, that's a huge accomplishment. I'm going to want to write in the resume that not only did I manage the social media accounts, but I also grew the followers by 10% during my 3-month internship. So that's really showing what you accomplished. And that note there says ranked higher by ATS. We'll talk more about it, but now that we're here, a lot of times companies, especially those big name companies, don't have an actual person reading your resume the first time around when you submit your resume through an application portal. It is actually a computer. So the way applicant tracking systems work is they have the job description and then they input some keywords into the system that when you submit your resume, it scans your resume looking for some of those keywords and descriptions. And if you meet a high enough threshold, that's when you're going to be seen by the recruiter. Because companies use applicant tracking systems, that's why students kind of get ghosted more. So if your resume is more general, it's not tailored to the role, doesn't have those numerical measures, it probably won't get picked up. So that's why it's really, really important to think about tailoring your resume, including those numerical measures, because it's a computer reading your resume the first time around, not an actual person. And a lot of students don't know this. Like the first time I heard this, I was like, oh, what? I thought there's recruiters for a reason, but it's because a lot of companies get thousands and thousands of resumes a day. And if recruiters were only reading resumes all day, that'd be their only job, not coordinating interviews, bringing in others, helping with onboarding, all that stuff. So really important to think about. So when you can, try to be detailed and tailor your resume because it really is going to help you. Then we have that second note about providing a baseline comparison. So I mentioned it, where if you're able to show the actual numerical growth, whether it's 10%, that's a baseline comparison of sorts. And then detail what you did to achieve your goal. So think about things that you did in terms of like strategy to help you be successful. So if it was going back to the same example of manage, Facebook and Instagram accounts and grew followers by 10%, you did this by posting daily, really engaging content that the viewers enjoyed, or you decided to make more videos tailored to the brand and you did at peak times. That's how you're describing how you also achieve that goal. And then we have that last note, which is focus on the impact of your work. And then the use keywords from job description, I would say is really important with applicant tracking systems, but you never want to fabricate what you did. So for example, if it says we're looking for someone that has like led, initiatives for, an organization, and you haven't been in a leadership role, you can talk about ways that you've taken initiative, but you never want to fabricate information and say, yes, I led this role, or I led this organization and you didn't lead it. So we want you to be as honest as possible, but you can always work with a career advisor at your school to see what are ways you can make more impact on your resume, and it's not fabricating information. Sounds good? So now we're going to kind of talk more about accomplishment bullet points. So we talked about the quantifiable results. These are the best ways to capture employers' attention because they can see you can do the work and you make impact. So then you want to give those specific examples. And the reason why we say that is because we want you to show and not just tell. So you can really explain the whole story of your success in that action bullet point. And then we have it to actually utilize bullet points. So sometimes on resumes, people will just write an essay, like a little paragraph of sorts of everything you did. It's actually a little bit easier for formatting to do it in bullet point form and just write a sentence for each. And then this is also like another opportunity to illustrate your personal brand. So we talked about things like if you really want to be known as being a leader, their work experiences and these action bullet points, depending on how you convey your experiences, can really show those leadership examples. Okay. So now what's really helpful is to actually go through like a sample job description. So this was a role we saw at the Career Center at USC, and this is what was asked for this sample job to be at Nike and human resources. But you can do this with any role. Don't feel like this is only specific to human resources. So at the first is actually a description of the role. So it talks about who Nike is, what they're looking for, what you're going to be doing, and then the requirements section. So always with, internships or jobs, whatever you're looking for, the requirements section is really important to focus on, because this is where it should be kind of highlighted with your resume. So you would go through the first point. They're currently looking for a student that's pursuing a bachelor's degree in human resources or related field with an expected graduation date. So you'd be like, cool, related field, even if it's business, even if it's humanities, social sciences, it's related if you have the experiences. So that's checked off. Then would be prior experience in human resources, talent acquisition, recruiting, diversity partnerships, or other related skills required. So even though maybe in your work experiences you haven't done human resources, but maybe you're part of a student org where you've helped bring on new members, or you helped decide who's going to be joining your e-board. That's talent acquisition. And maybe with recruiting, you've helped post the positions, you've tabled at student fairs, student org fairs to get people to come in. That's recruiting. So there are many different ways to show those experiences that might not be in actual work experiences. Your student org involvement, your volunteer experience, previous roles outside of the university are very relevant. So really think about it that way. Then we have Microsoft Office skills and tools. We have strong written and verbal communication skills. And then we have, I highlighted in black, is the comfortability presenting to a large audience, including senior leadership. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things you can talk about in your resume to show that you're qualified for the role. So how we would do it. So I highlighted that role about presenting to large audiences. So we talked about with like accomplishment bullet points, you really want to make impact. So if I just wrote on my resume, did a presentation for students on resume and cover letters, it doesn't have the same impact. When did I do the presentation? For how many students did I do it to? I didn't include anything. So even my after could even be enhanced. So my after, as I wrote it, was designed and presented interactive presentations on crafting a winning resume and cover letter to undergraduate students in order to prepare for the internship search. I even left out how many students I presented to. So maybe if I presented to 300 plus students, I would include that figure. But I talk about how I designed the presentation myself, and then I presented it to different students so that they can be prepared for the internship search. That would show Nike, when they're looking at my resume, that I have presentation skills, I have design skills, and I know how to talk to large audiences. And it goes back to that formula of action verb, transition phase, the why purpose, and then the result, which is that impact. So that's how you can really think about when you're crafting through every part of your resume. So now the actual format. I'm a visual learner, so it really helps to kind of see what a resume should look like. And something to know, resumes are not the prettiest. Normally the one-page resume that's black and white, Times New Roman, it's pretty boring, but there's a reason for it, especially now with applicant tracking systems. The boring resume actually helps a lot. However, if you ever are considering a creative resume, you can always make it as a second option and attach it as, an additional document. But normally in life sciences and medicine, you're going to be sticking with the standard resume format. So just wanted to show you what the two examples could look like with the different section headings, your title at the top that has all your information. And then here in the middle is this applicant tracking system, kind of creative resume. We also would recommend not putting photos. It can kind of throw off the algorithm and they're like, what is this? And you don't want anything to have marks against you on an applicant tracking system. So think of things like logos, pictures, all that good stuff. Don't use it, but if you really want to provide a creative resume, you can always provide it as an additional document. And another thing to also keep in mind about applicant tracking systems is that you will always want to make the resume as a Word document, or if you're doing it in Google Docs, make it first in Google Docs, but then always convert it as a PDF and submit the PDF to different jobs or for grad school. Because sometimes if you have some formatting or margins that are kind of off in the Word doc, and then you submit it and then they open it and don't have an updated version of Microsoft Word, or they use a different system, your formatting can get all messed up. So we really recommend submitting it as a PDF, because the PDF will kind of stamp it as it is and it won't make any changes to it. So when you can, always save a copy as a PDF, because your Word doc is what you're going to continue to update. So any questions so far? I don't know if there was anything, Charlotte or Caleb. All good?
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So before we start jumping into cover letters, these are some of the general resume takeaways we really want students to think about. So first and foremost, you're always going to want to customize your resume for the internship job of your industry. I will be honest, this does take time. It can be really daunting and difficult that for every role you want to go for, you have to update your resume. But as you get more comfortable with all your experiences and the formula of writing accomplishment bullet points, it won't take as much time, but it will really have a lot of impact and will go a long way. And remember to focus on relevant skills and results. Never make assumptions, don't fabricate anything. You know, integrity is really big in the job search process. So something to keep in mind, just be true to who you are and what you've done in the role, and don't feel like you have to try to be anything else. Outside of that, what's really helpful is be resourceful. So using things like LinkedIn or Indeed or through your school's own career center, look at different job postings or industry keywords and clues to see what is exactly trending in this industry. What are they looking for, so that you can best prepare yourself, or maybe for the next quarter or the next semester when you're picking classes or thinking of what you want to get involved in, you pick something from one of those categories so that you now have that experience. I mentioned this, but remember to save your resume in PDF form. And as a best practice, it really helps to track as well, to do maybe like last name, first name, the company or role that you're applying to, just as a way to stay organized. We talked about format. Normally for like students in life sciences or interested in healthcare, it is going to be that one page kind of black and white. Even though boring resume, it is the normal, so don't feel like it's not as exciting as a creative resume. This is normal to use this, and this is the standard. But just make sure it's an easy to read format and simple font types. I didn't mention this, but normally fonts can range from 10 to 12 size font. Anything smaller is really hard to read. Anything larger, the space on your resume is limited, so that's a really good range to kind of stick to. Make sure you research the position and organization. So depending on those here on the call, each school has different research opportunities. So sometimes you could check through your library at your university to see if you can research the company or role. I know at USC we use something called vault.com, which is really great, where you can actually research the company and the organization and see what's also kind of trending, as well, to make sure you're best preparing yourself for writing the resume. And then put important information toward the top of the resume. So as I mentioned, you're all students right now, so you really want that students or education section to be the first thing at the top of your resume. Again, include relevant experiences and accomplishments. It doesn't have to include everything you've ever done, but just the most relevant to the role or experience that you're applying for. And again, proofread, 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 triple check for errors. Like anything as a student, it does help a lot. I know on rubrics, you know, grammar and spelling is always things like I would get docked off for, just because I'd be like, okay, I did this last minute, I need to turn it in, I didn't proofread it, and I got 2 points knocked off, and I could have easily avoided that if I triple checked. So just with anything, triple check your application materials as well. So now what's trending? So the whole system of applying to roles and internships has changed now with applicant tracking systems, with social media. So there are different things you also want to think about too, outside of just your resume and cover letter. So first is social media presence. We really recommend keeping it clean, especially if you have a public Instagram account tied to your name or anything like that. A simple Google search will bring that up, and you don't want that to be a factor in why they didn't consider you as a candidate. So Don't want to, be a parent or guardian being like, don't use social media, just keep it clean. Then something to also consider maybe adding is this personal or professional website. So I know this is really common in engineering to have like a GitHub to highlight any projects you worked on or anything that's related to that field. So maybe it's something to consider, like to just highlight all your amazing experiences, make a website. And then that's also another skill to say, oh, I've made a website too. So it's a win-win for everyone. I talked about applicant tracking systems, so not going to talk about it as much, just make sure to use strong keywords and experiences that match the job. Again, talked about relevant experiences, and then success verbs. This hyperlink, if you just search it in Google, the Muse 185 powerful verbs that will make your resume awesome. It's an amazing link that really does kind of highlight different ways you can talk about actions that you've taken. So a really common action verb that students write is assisted. We don't want to take full credit that we did something like, I just assisted with planning this conference. No, you launched the conference, you planned everything, you did all the work for it. It's more than just assisted. So there's other ways to really talk about what work you did. And for when you're writing a resume, remember it's like a humble brag. It's really hard to talk about your experiences and your successes because you're like, I don't want to come off like cocky or I'm overly confident, but it's a humble brag. So really think about the impact that you've made and be proud of that. And employers are going to want to see that too. And then when you can, use resume formats and templates. So I actually did a little bit of research for students at UCLA. You use a system also called VMOC. If you have not used VMOC, please go use it. If anything you take away from this, use VMOC. It has different resume templates, but it also kind of mimics like applicant tracking systems and will scan your resume. Oh, I'm getting tongue-tied. It scans your resume and gives you feedback on your resume of what you can do to improve for the field you want to go into. Apologies, but it's the best tool. Like as a student, I've used it. Every appointment I meet with a student, I tell them they should use it because it really helps to kind of see where you can improve and get better on your resume with a computer that is actually going to also scan your resume and mimic the whole process of an applicant tracking system. So that is all resumes. It's a lot of information, but just remember resumes are living, breathing documents. They will change as you gain more experience, as you take new classes, as you finish school, as you get other jobs. So it's up to you to update it. So try to also make it a good habit to update your resume when you can, so you're not doing it all right before a job application is due and you're rushing and scrambling to finish it. So something to keep in mind. So now cover letters. So resumes are, think of it as like the marketing brochure outlining all your different experiences and who you are. A cover letter complements a resume, and it's typically only going to be used in the job or internship search process. When you're applying to grad school, it's not going to be a cover letter that's asked of you, but more of a personal statement or an essay that you're going to be provided. So it's very different from a cover letter, but a cover letter is typically part of the job or internship search. But what it does is it's a written form of showing your excitement for the role, your passion, but also your qualifications and experiences. So again, it helps introduce yourself, highlight some of the main points in your resume. It markets to talents to help get the interview and also demonstrates your writing. So a lot of times a company or an internship, for example, will say they want someone that is a strong writer. Make a cover letter because that is a writing sample to show that you're a good writer, that you can do the job. And that's like an actual portfolio item. You can say, look, this is how you can say I'm a good writer. Not only can I talk about myself and I'm excited about the role, but I can write really well too. So those are some of the benefits of a cover letter. So now the format. So very similar to a resume, this is going to be in letter form. So there's going to be a heading at the top and then salutations of who you're going to be writing to. So typically it's the name of the hiring manager. You're going to include their title and address. And something to keep in mind is you're going to want to also write this in letter form. So you're writing it to dear someone or to whom it may concern. One thing also to keep in mind is because now we're shifting from writing, Mr. and Mrs. and Miss, because sometimes marital status isn't you shouldn't assume it. And same with gender. If you don't know somebody's gender or marital status, it's always safe to just write last name, first name, or first name, last name. So it'd be like, Dear Malika Samtani. You don't have to assume I'm Miss or Mrs. or anything like that, because names are, don't confine to like a gender. So just something to keep in mind to keep you safe. I would recommend just always writing Dear, first name, last name. Or if if they have like a professional degree, like if they're doctor something, you can write doctor. That's always safe to do as well. And then there's going to be an opening paragraph of kind of introducing yourself. And I'm going to talk about each of the sections in the next slides. Then there's the body of the cover letter. This is really going to be highlighting all your experiences, your skills, and why you should get the role. And then your closing and conclusion and signature. So again, it is in letter format. You're writing it to someone, and it's not a general letter. It's to a specific person. So with the opening paragraph, you're going to want to reference the position by name. So this is why with cover letters, they're very detail oriented to the role in which you're wanting to pursue. So you're going to write, it was for this example here with Ms. Annenberg, which is a school at USC. It starts off with, it was great meeting you during the University of California Internship Week marketing panel on February 13th. So include how you learned about this role and them, the contact of the person, and any educational background about yourself. So you'd say, I'm a junior at USC, majoring in psychology, whatever your role is, and I'm very interested in the opportunity as a social media and marketing manager for whatever it is. So you're including things like the role itself, how you learned about the role, your educational information, as well as why you're interested in the role. So this student wrote that they're really excited about this opportunity because they can combine their skills in social media and marketing. And then the rest of your essay or letter will be talking about your skills in social media and marketing, because that's what's needed for the role. So then I talked about salutations. You always want to be professional and courteous. So just if you can, address the cover letter to a specific individual if possible. A lot of times students would go to LinkedIn and look for the recruiter on the internship or job description and might say to contact this individual. So that's the person you can write the letter to. And then with the different, salutation types, if you know gender and you know marital status, you can always write Mr. or Ms. You can always write Dear Hiring Manager or just Dear First Name, Last Name. So that's how you can go about the salutation piece on resumes. Now the body of the cover letter. So we talked about the opening, we talked about the salutations. So now the additional paragraphs. So these are going to be those specific examples of your experiences, skills, and qualifications that are tied to the role. You have to write to the employer to show why you're qualified. So you want to highlight any talents and abilities. So with this example, I was talking with a student group that used StrengthsQuest to talk about different strengths that you might have. So let's say your strength was developer. We wrote a sample sentence in a cover letter. Could be, I have a strong desire to work with people, but in the manner of helping them develop to their fullest potentials as working individuals in their role. So think about your skills, your traits that you have that are important that could demonstrate to the hiring manager that you're a qualified individual. So any of those talents or abilities that make you stand out, you can talk about in your cover letter. So then continuing it, your body of the cover letter could be 2 to 3 paragraphs. We just always recommend a cover letter only stay on 1 page. So you're still additionally selling yourself to the employer. Again, showing why you're qualified, but maybe some additional things to consider are any type of activities, athletics, clubs and organizations you're involved with, any coursework that has taught you the material needed for the role, or any professional associations. So sometimes you might be part of a national organization that is in the field that you're interested in. It's good to highlight that. So really just highlighting different things that show you'd be a great candidate and your qualifications align with the role. And you're just doing it in a written form rather than just in specific bullet points like your resume. So then lastly is a closing or last paragraph. You're again going to state your interests and qualifications in the position. Typically you do this in 1 sentence. indicate next step or follow-up. So normally a sentence is like, I look forward to hearing from you about next steps for the interview process. You can contact me at insert email and insert phone number. Hope you have a wonderful day. And then typically you sign it with best, sincerely, and then you would sign it if you can. I know on Adobe, like on PDF, you can always sign your name that way, so it's like a signature, but you can always just type your first name and last name as well to sign the letter. So it should always end signing from someone. So I mentioned this earlier, but even if an employer makes the cover letter optional, so a lot of times on internship or job applications, it's going to say cover letter optional. I really, really recommend you do it because it's a great opportunity to show off those writing skills and show your qualifications in another way. Sometimes it might be you and yourself, or yourself and another person are the final candidates deciding who to move forward with in an interview. And if you have that cover letter, they're most likely going to go with you because you took the time and initiative to write about the role and to really get to know the organization and demonstrate your passion. So they're most likely going to go with you. So keep that in mind. It could be a deciding factor. So we actually now have 12 minutes left. So I want to leave time for any open Q&A. But even though I'm at USC, I am still a student. I'm very passionate about helping students. This is my contact info. And if you ever are considering going to USC or have any questions, you can always email me and reach out. But really hope that you all learned a lot from this session. And again, go to your school career centers. They have a lot of amazing information. And just wishing you all the best and enjoy the rest of the flight conference.
Thank you so very much, Malika. That was an amazing presentation. I invite everyone to either share any of their questions in the chat or to unmute themselves. As Malika said, I believe we have about 10 minutes left.
Yes, Nina?
Hi, Malika. Thanks so much for that presentation. Going back to resumes, I was just wondering what your tips you have for keeping track of all the resumes. So for me, throughout the summer, I've been applying to a lot of summer internships and I created probably like 5 different resumes. And it was kind of hard for me to keep track of where to go or like which one to submit. So what tips do you have for that?
So I actually am a big proponent of not like making an Excel sheet yourself, but looking for tools that will actually help you track everything. So in the chat, I'm actually putting something in called JobWell. JobWell is a very interactive Excel sheet of sorts where you can actually track the entire job search process. So you can include the link of the job, what you applied with, but also then track the name of like the resume you use. So what I would do to stay organized is if you use like a Google Drive or if you keep everything on a desktop, have a resume folder, but follow that format of calling it, your name and then the role that you applied for. And then have it kind of tracked either on an Excel sheet or use JobWell to then track which resume you use so you know which materials you use. But then you can also track when you applied. Maybe now it's time to do some follow-up or look for someone at the organization to ask about next steps, or if the recruiter was listed, follow up with them to see when you might be hearing back. And that's a really helpful way to just kind of keep yourself organized because it can be a lot.
Great, thank you so much.
Any other questions? You can write them in the chat. Yes, Charlotte.
Hey, so thank you again for your amazing presentation. It was super helpful. I was just wondering, would you have any advice on how we could make a resume for a field that maybe we're not as experienced in? Because for example, I have a lot of experience in the healthcare field or the life sciences field, but I'm also thinking of maybe applying for internships in the business field or the fashion industry and stuff. So, or not necessarily jobs, but internships. So what advice would you have in tailoring a resume for positions that aren't necessarily in our field of experience?
No, Charlotte, that is a great question. And what I always tell the students is the skills that you gain, regardless of the field that it's in, you're going to find ways to make it transferable. So talking about myself, I studied poli-sci in my undergrad, but most of my internship work was in entertainment. And then I pivoted to education. And it's a weird jump but there are ways to talk about the skills that I learned in entertainment and poli-sci and then apply it to what would be needed in education. So for example, with the role and work you did in healthcare, there are probably a lot of important skills such as, working with others or working with clients, being confidential, having really great personal skills that could translate then to fashion or business. Then maybe where you would want to start thinking about is getting involved with student orgs that could be around fashion or business, maybe taking some additional courses. Like I know a lot of students get certifications through LinkedIn Learning if their school provides it for free. And you can talk about that being, additional ways you're trying to pivot into that, but also think about the courses you take at, UCLA or any other school that could also be transferable. What I would always just say is think about how you can bridge those kind of like skills to each role and don't feel like it has to be only in that field, because a lot of times actual work you did is transferable to many different organizations, and that's where also a cover letter is really going to help tell your story. Your focus was really in healthcare, this is what you're considering, but you discovered a passion of fashion, it rhymes, and talk about where that came from and where you hope to go with it, and that could really help. But it was a great question.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? And I'll put my email in the chat too, so if anything comes up later.
I had one.
Yeah, go ahead.
One last one, I guess. I have used pretty recently for the resumes that I've had to turn in for like jobs or internships or org. I've used primarily like Canva, and I know that those, I mean, I try to use like the most kind of bare bones ones as possible, but I do know that some of them do include your picture and some have like colors and that kind of stuff. So do you have any recommendations for some templates to kind of get that more refined, simple, basic look that is helpful for getting through the tracking system?
What I would say too, and it's a great question you brought up with Canva, and actually my partner had his whole resume done on Canva. And what I showed him is if you're actually using like a screen reader, it reads it as nothing on it. If it's like just images or like the text isn't from Word or something. So that was always really interesting that I was like, this, if you submitted it, they're going to see that it's like blank and they're not going to actually think to correct it unless it's like a small pool. But if you're applying to a lot of big organizations, it's really best to start with like Word. But to get those templates, I know at USC in VMOC, we actually have templates for students to download. And they're, pre-formatted templates of sorts that when you log in, you can just download it and kind of plug in your own information. But I would say I talked about the company or the website, the Balance Careers has some amazing templates on it. And it's specific also to the different fields you want to go into. There's another one called the Muse. We'll have some templates as well. But I would always say just start with your Career Center. Chances are they probably have a template that you can just get emailed to you, and then you would just do the same thing of plugging in your information. And that's kind of like the format that the school kind of approves of, which is that standard black and white, not the most fun resume, but you can always do both. So if I were you, if you still want to consider doing Canva, because it is fun, especially for anyone considering any type of graphic design, marketing, anything like that, where that kind of visual creative side is needed, make that creative resume, attach it as an additional document, but still work on just having that standard one-page black and white resume that will have all the content, but then they can see your creative side on that additional resume.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. If we don't have any other questions, I know it's never a bad thing to leave a Zoom early and give you back some time. So it's whatever you all like.
Okay, yeah, I think we are good. Thank you so much again, Malika, for taking time out of your day to be with us at this conference put on by the school across town. We really appreciate it. Yeah, we hope you for the rest of your day, and we wish you the best of luck in the rest of your master's program.
Well, thank you all. Best of luck to you all too. Good luck with the rest of the quarter. I always forget it's quarter, and just wishing you all the best, okay? Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. Thank you everyone for attending.
Bye, Allison.